All right. So we finished up last week. We finished up Lesson 8, Lesson 9, dealing with adultery, living in adultery. We talked about mental divorce. We talked about mental adultery last week, and also whether or not one can divorce for the sake of the kingdom. As we finished last week, we talked about that. So now we're moving on to Lesson 10. Lesson 10's lesson's called The Abortion Crisis, and obviously this is a topic that is particularly applicable given recent events in our society. So I think it's a particularly good topic to be familiar with, especially as it pertains to God's Word. Now we're not going to spend a lot of time on the statistics and so forth that are mentioned by Bob Buchanan here in this article. Again, most of those statistics are from the 70s. So those, even though they no longer specifically apply, obviously the trend is still certainly applies that way. So as he starts out here with our lesson, he mentions Lamentations chapter 1, verse 12. Jeremiah asking the question, "Is it nothing to you, all ye that pass by?" That's in context of God's anger towards his people and the fact that they don't seem all that concerned about it. They don't seem all that worried about it. And it's on that basis that he kind of builds this with regard to our society as well. He says, "The same attitude of indifference, apathy, and lack of concern appears to be prevalent in our day relative to such moral issues as abortion." He's going to talk a little bit about Supreme Court rulings back in 1973. Obviously, a lot of that has changed. But more and more, as laws are changed, Christians will have to consider principles in God's Word to determine right from wrong. And obviously, that's as God applies right from wrong, not as man applies right and wrong, or their standard of fair or unfair. And this is true across the board. This is something that we face every day, no matter who we're talking to, no matter what political party people associate with. Laws that get passed according to man's idea of fairness or whatnot, sometimes they may present an opportunity, for one thing, to talk about God's Word, but also may present a situation that we face that we may have to choose over between choosing to serve God or choosing to serve man. And that's something obviously in Acts chapter 5 or Acts chapter 4 that the apostles, that was something they had to make the choice. They even asked the Sanhedrin, if it's better in the sight of God to obey you rather than God, you judge that. But as for them, they were going to obey God. They could not help but speak the things that they've seen and heard. And as I mentioned, there's more statistics here, and those are going to be applicable to the questions, but even so, we're going to kind of deal with some of the meat of the lesson here. With regard to the question of life, the whole abortion debate comes down to one question: when does the life of a separate human being begin? This question strikes at the very heart of the issue. It was George Orwell who pointed out that it is possible to distort language so that words take on the reverse of their actual meaning. And of course, we certainly see that in our society. As we examine this question, we must beware of pro-abortionist terminology. To the average person, terminate does not mean the same as to kill, and fetus definitely no longer falls on the listening ear as human, but rather as a non-human glob. The abortionists may refer to abortion as simply a process of limiting fertility. They may refer to it as killing the cells and tissues of conception. He may even refer to the early stages of development as potential life. We must show that this is not merely potential life, but it actually is life, human life. And certainly we're all familiar with these phrases and terms, and there's different ways in which variations of the way in which people refer to these topics as well over the last, over the 50 decades or so since this was written. Termination and pregnancy and interruption of pregnancy, retroactive contraception, all are verbal gymnastics behind which to hide the real message of what is happening. Induced abortion is more accurate. Killing the life within the mother, killing the fetus, and more to the point, killing the unborn baby, directly face the issue and are the most honest and preferable terms to use. If you are convinced that this is a human life, call it such. We should speak of he and she, not it, and speak of the unborn, preborn, or developing child or baby. It is easy to get the world to approve killing a fetus, but much less so to the killing of an unborn baby. And certainly that's where the debate, certainly in our society, comes down to, is the determination of what is a life and what is not. Of course, I think it's ironic and sad that the very people who will argue that the fetus inside a mother is not life, up to and including full term almost, okay, abortions at 7 and 8 months are even defended by many people, even after at that point certainly a baby is viable outside of the womb, and yet they support, because it hasn't actually come out of the mother yet, it's not alive. However, by the same breath, many of these people will get very upset and angry over the destruction of turtle eggs, birds' eggs. In fact, I read an article, in fact, I even saved it to my book list, bookmarks, because it specifically referred to the fact that we have no right to kill the potential life that is there. But it used the person who was being interviewed, they said to kill the potential life. Well, you can't kill something if it's not alive. Okay, and so they were getting so upset over turtle eggs and birds' eggs and things like that that were being destroyed by deforestation and things like that. And yet, by the same breath, people will say that an unborn baby, no matter how far along it is, as long as it's not born yet, it's not a human. It's not alive. And I just think that's double speak, ultimately. And, I mean, if we're going to hold the babies or the unborn children of animals to a degree which we say, hey, these are important to preserve in the wilderness, in the wild, then how much more so a human being? All right, anything through this discussion so far of the question of life? And he's going to get into more specifics about the progression of a baby in the womb and so forth here in a little bit. All right, the development of the baby, basic to the consideration of whether this life within the mother is human, or even when this life becomes human, must be the presently known scientific facts of the development within the uterus. What are the facts concerning the development of the baby? What do we know? In the October 1971 term of the Supreme Court, a distinguished group of 220 physicians, professors, and fellows of the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology submitted a brief to the court. In this brief, they tried to show how modern science established that the unborn child from the moment of conception is a person and therefore, like the mother, a patient. John M. Langone has summarized this brief. I give here several quotes from this article that pertain to the development of the child from conception through 3 months. Now, we're not going to read through all of that, and certainly some of this, I wouldn't say some of it has changed, but some of what we consider, for instance, here in this second paragraph, the heart starts irregular pulsating at 24 days and about a week later smooths into rhythmic contractions. But there's certainly even a type of a life beat to the fetus as of conception. And that's one of the things where we see billboards. The heartbeat starts, I think, at like 6 days or 10 days, whatever it is. And that's not specific to the heartbeat itself, but there is a rhythm of life that can be detected as of that point. And so that's why oftentimes people refer to a heartbeat or a life beat even before 24 days into the development of a baby. And again, it goes all the way through, talks about the 20th day, the foundation of the child's brain, spinal cord, entire nervous system are established. By the beginning of the 2nd month, the unborn child looks distinctly human, yet the mother's not aware that she's pregnant. In fact, this is by this point, when most people become aware that they're pregnant, it is at that point. And so certainly that's part of the reason why there have been attempts by state governments and so forth to attempt to force individuals to receive a sonogram before they make a decision to abort. And the argument has been against that, well, you shouldn't force them to do that. And of course, the fear is if they see that this child looks like a person, they may change their mind. And that's kind of the concern, is that you're trying to basically guilt these people into having the baby by actually seeing a picture of the baby. Well, I mean, it kind of reinforces or rams home the fact that this is a person. This is a human being. When people are being taught that the baby inside the womb is simply just a jumble of cells, and a lot of times they're not being taught that as of, 4 weeks into it, it looks like a child. It looks like a baby. And I think that's poignant. Any other thoughts or comments through that? In spite of these facts, some people act as though the unborn child is not a human being. They are willing to cut it apart and throw the pieces into the nearest garbage can. And of course, we've heard quite a bit about, graphically, about some of that's been going on. Dr. Gardner, consultant obstetrician and gynecologist, expressed his view that the unborn child was not a human being in these words. When a spontaneous miscarriage occurs, parents may grieve, but we do not feel that we have lost a child. From time to time, obstetricians have the distress of delivering a stillborn baby. We may have felt this fetus kick under our examining hands. We may have listened to its heartbeat repeatedly over 4 months. Yet when the tragedy occurs, we do not feel here is a child who died, but rather here is a fetus which so nearly made it. Miscarriages are not buried and are not named. Now, obviously, Dr. Gardner was speaking for himself, because I know full well of individuals who had miscarriages where they did bury the baby and they did name it. And so he's not speaking broadly there or in any way by the complete view with that. But the fact that he has to say that we felt the fetus kick, okay, well, obviously something's alive in there if something's kicking. The fact that he says we've listened to its heartbeat. Notice he uses these kind of dehumanizing pronouns, it. Not he or she, it's an it. It's not alive and it's not a human being, and yet it has a heartbeat and it can kick. And it just goes to show that people can kind of rework that in their mind, kind of twist it in their mind to convince themselves that this isn't alive, even though on its own power it's kicking, and in its own power it's got a heartbeat. Thoughts or comments through that?
The whole paragraph just makes me angry.
I know, yeah, it does.
I worked in the ER and I saw people come in bringing their babies in, wrapped in blue pads when they lost their babies at home. And it still angers me that we have to put those sweet little things in a container with a form, products of conception, and it goes to pathology. So he's right, miscarriages are not always buried. But when you watch that mother and father bawling their eyes out,
Yeah.
and we've come a long way in the medical field where we remember, more people are noticing, okay, we need to acknowledge this child.
Yeah.
We can dress them up and give them a pretty pillow to lie on. If the parents want, we take a picture. It's not anything except a baby.
Right.
But it's that whole paragraph just.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and it's, I personally know a mother who went into premature labor at 20 weeks, and that baby was in the hospital for probably at least 6 months, and she is now perfectly healthy. She's perfectly fine, but at 20 weeks, and that baby, her lungs were still forming. Her lungs weren't completely formed yet, and yet medical science was able to keep that baby alive. But just because that baby was outside of the womb didn't make it any more or less alive than when it was inside the womb. It's not as if when mothers go into premature labor that whatever comes out, since it's not fully formed, it's not a human being or it's not real. And it really does, the mental gymnastics that are required to kind of justify it, it really does bring about a sense of anger and frustration and certainly sorrow over the fact that these types of things happen, and people certainly, and this is not the only situation, abortion is not the only type of situation where people go through this process of justification. Obviously, any sin can be justified if they try hard enough, and people have and done have done that. All right, anything else through that? Yes, sir.
It's kind of like our society today, where decide to be
Yeah.
There's no other options. Baby's either alive or dead.
Yeah.
There's no other option.
Yeah. It can't be half alive, half dead.
It and a, whatever.
Yeah.
It's alive.
Yeah. You know, and that goes really to an insistence on refusing to acknowledge reality. You know, and that's a whole other topic in and of itself. But when you start pandering, when you start affirming, in fact, that term we hear throughout our society is affirm. Does anybody know what affirm means? A lot of times people take it and use it as support or encourage. You know what affirm means? Sorry? To lift up? When something's found true. It is to acknowledge as being true. Okay, I read an article about how that you can affirm individuals who are homosexual or transgender without necessarily agreeing with their lifestyle. No, you can't. Affirmation is to acknowledge that it is true. Well, either a baby is alive, as Ben said, or it's not. Either a fetus is alive or it's not. And when you have a doctor who is acknowledging it's kicking, it has a heartbeat, and yet it must be dead to him. It's not living, it's not alive. But on a different train is the idea that our society, our children, okay, for decades now have been taught in school, where did man come from? Monkeys. Or they're trying to kind of redefine that now, that we didn't technically arise from monkeys, but an offshoot of monkeys, so as to explain why are there still monkeys and apes. Well, we were a different subspecies, and we just happened to evolve faster. But the fact of the matter is, when we're defining two children, that we are no different, no better than an animal. Well, animals, you shoot animals, especially if they're a danger to other to people or whatnot. You shoot animals like it's no problem. Animals' lives don't have that value because that's all they are. They're animals. When you're telling children that human beings are nothing more than animals, is it any wonder that there's such a lack of value for life? Okay, we have 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds taking guns to school and shooting people for selfish reasons. Okay, I didn't like this person, or they wouldn't acknowledge me, or whatever. Okay, selfish reasons, and yet no consideration whatsoever of the fact that life has value. That life is important. Well, it's no more important than a dog or a cat, or for that matter, a mosquito or a frog. It's all the same thing. So what difference does it make? And ultimately, our society has kind of built itself this problem because we've been telling our children human beings don't have value. And this is just another example of that. When we can define an unborn child, regardless of what stage it's in, when we can define that unborn child as simply a bunch of cells, no different than a tumor, then certainly people aren't going to value it any more than they would value human life, since we're all animals anyway. Gilbert?
On the word that you just mentioned, definition, I'd like to get a little more scientific. In Genesis 1, God made Adam, and he was a lump of cells, and then God breathed life into him. So air moving in and out is when Adam came to life. We'll take that lump of cells and get it down to two that we call a zygote that's in the mom's womb. The mom gets her own air from her lungs, but those two cells, they have air, oxygen moving in and carbon monoxide moving out. So air is moving in and out, and then of course as it develops lungs, it gets a lot more air
Right.
moving in and out. So the Bible, if you're talking with someone who is a Bible person, you get right back to Adam. That air is moving in and out.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly as soon as that baby is conceived, a separate form has been created. It has its own processes. Just because it's dependent on the mother doesn't make it a tumor. It has its own independent processes that are taking place. And that includes the oxygenation of blood and veins and so forth. Anything else? All right, so looking at scriptures, one can take a concordance and never find where abortion is mentioned specifically by name in either testament. Is it therefore approved by the silence of the Scriptures? Many things are determined to be right or wrong by comparing them with general principles of truth as set forth in God's Word. I am convinced, this is Bob speaking, I'm convinced that there are numerous divine principles that speak to this issue. Let us notice some of them. So he brings up Exodus chapter 21. In fact, this is there was an article that was posted by a Jewish rabbi actually utilizing this passage in defense of abortion, which I thought was odd. In fact, apparently this is not new. I had never heard that defense before, but Bob actually deals with that. But in Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 through 24, we read, "If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, yet no mischief follow, he shall be surely punished, according as the woman's husband will lay upon him." There's a fine there. You've hurt my wife, who was with child, but the child was born, her fruit depart from her, so the child was born, but no harm has come. The baby's okay. Then the husband certainly can lay a fine on this man for harming his wife. He shall pay as the judges determine. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. On these verses, some have argued if the baby is killed, only a fine is imposed, but if the mother is killed, capital punishment is given. And that is the basis upon which this rabbi was arguing. He was saying that, okay, so if men strive and hurt a woman with child, but the woman herself is unharmed, whether or not the baby lives or dies, that's not what's at issue. It's whether the woman herself dies. Well, in that case, if she doesn't die, everything's fine, regardless of what happens to the fetus. But the question is actually answered within the context itself. How would you respond to that? Within the context itself. Why would God specify hurt a woman with child if what he is intending to convey is simply a man who hurts another man's wife? If the focus and the attention is only on the wife, why bother specifying a woman with child? That woman's going to be a person's wife whether she's with child or not. Okay, and we're not even dealing with the fact that the text says with child and not with fetus or tumor. Okay, it says with child. But never mind that. The fact is that God is specifying a pregnant woman. The fact that he has to specify that puts the attention on the baby inside of her, not just the fact that she is this man's wife and now she's been hurt because these two men got in a fight.
Well, where do they get if the mother is killed? That's not specified in the text.
I know.
It says further damage, further harm.
Right. If mischief is incurred or if mischief takes place, and that they are, again, it's that twisting of Scripture, but they're taking that to say that means that if the woman is harmed or the woman is killed more specifically. And that's how they have taken that, because they completely, and it really does go down to their worldview or their interpretation, which is that a baby who's not born yet isn't real. It's not a human life. So if it's not a human life, why would God care about it? And so that's how they view it. So they have to take that text and twist it and make it mean something that it doesn't mean, which the attention is on the mother. Now, certainly, sure, if the mother is killed in this process, sure, there's going to be its own issue, but that's a part of killing someone. God's focus in this text is about the unborn baby. And that's why he says, therefore, unborn babies are not persons, is the argument. But there is an alternative. The words, yet no harm follows, may mean the child is miscarried, but does not die. And I think in the fact that God says, and her fruit leaves her, what would be a woman's fruit? The baby inside. In the context of a woman with child, that would be the baby. Okay, yet no harm follows. I think the context makes it very clear that it is a child that maybe is preborn and yet doesn't die. Then the expression, if any harm follows, means that if the child, the mother, or both die, then the guilty party is to be capitally punished. If men strove and thrust against a woman with child who had come near to between them for the purpose of making peace, he's quoting from a Bible dictionary. He mentions it down here, the biblical commentary on the Old Testament from Keel and Delitzsch. And he says, so that her children come into the world, and no injury was done either to the woman or the child that was born. A pecuniary compensation was to be paid, a fine, such as the husband of the woman laid upon him. A fine is imposed because even if no injury had been done to the woman and the fruit of her womb, such a blow might have endangered life. So regardless of if any quote-unquote mischief takes place, which is harm that has taken place on this woman or her unborn child, or for that matter born, as is the context, then there's still a fine because you endangered that woman and her child. And I think that the fact that even a Jewish rabbi has tried to twist that and make that, in fact, in his argument, he was actually defending the right to an abortion. In fact, he was trying to make the case that God says it's perfectly fine if you get an abortion because of this scripture, this text. And then he tried to relay other passages about if your life is in danger, you would be in sin. For instance, if a woman who was pregnant and it was threatening her life, that woman would commit sin if she didn't abort the baby. And he tried to use this scripture as well as other scriptures to try to make that case. But he was twisting the scripture. That's not at all what this scripture has nothing to do about abortion. And no matter how he trying to twist it to make it say you're committing sin if you don't protect your own life, that's not anywhere found in scripture. Thoughts or comments through Exodus? All right, Job. Job asked, why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came out of the belly? Job chapter 3, verse 11. He could not give up what he did not have. And yet he argues that had he so died, he would have been at rest with kings and counselors of the earth. Verses 13 and 14. If he had been as an hidden untimely birth or miscarriage, he would have been where the weary be at rest, as he mentions in verse 16 and 17. In Job chapter 10, Job continued by wishing he had given up the ghost and no eye had seen. Talking about no eye had seen him. But again, one cannot give up what he does not have. He would have been carried from the womb to the grave. Job 10, verses 18 through 19. Talking about stillborn is what he's describing there. Thoughts or comments through that? Now, what some people will argue, okay, especially as we get into the New Testament, is that, well, these people were so primitive, they just didn't understand the difference. Or their words couldn't convey the difference between a woman with child who was pregnant versus a child who had already been born. Yet, what's the one thing we have to remember about both the Old and New Testaments? They're inspired of God. Okay. If God had intended to make a differentiation between an unborn child and a born child, he would have made that distinction. Whether or not there were ways or words or phrases with which to convey that in their languages, God would have made that distinction. And yet in Old or New Testaments, God doesn't make that distinction. In fact, specifically, they are conveyed as one and the same. A child that is in the womb is no different than a child outside of the womb. So we have to remember that, yeah, okay, these people, from a technological and maybe medical perspective, yes, they may have been primitive in their knowledge as not having a full understanding. But this isn't written by man. This is written by God. God inspired it, and men wrote it down. So really, when you say that, you're saying that God is too stupid to know the difference between an unborn and a born baby. That's really what the argument is being made. And I don't believe God is too stupid at all. God's the one who created it in the first place. Anything else through Job? Yes, sir.
Just on that point you made, there's a sense where it's really the opposite, and keep my words very plain, don't want to be gross, but you have to flip it around and realize we're talking about people where every tent had to go out and butcher an animal to stay alive. They have looked at the organs. They knew a lot more about the development of a little thing into a big thing
Absolutely.
teach us things.
Yeah.
Even though they did not have a microscope.
That's right. That's a great point. That's an excellent point. Yeah. All right. Genesis chapter 25, we even talked about this when we talked about Esau. When Jacob and Esau were in Rebekah's womb, they were living children. Genesis 25 and in verse 22 says that the children struggled within, or together within her. Notice that they were called children while they were still in the mother's womb. This clear language shows that the life in the body of a woman is a child. It is a human being. From the time of fertilization until death, one is always a human being. And really, in a lot of ways, we can talk about when does life begin and so forth, all we want to. But really, what is and should be of most importance to us is when does God instill a soul into a human being? That is really the ultimate question. Because animals are born, they die, but do animals have souls? No. Human beings, which are made in the image of God, they're given a soul. They're given a spirit. Well, at what point does a human being receive that spirit or soul from God? From the moment it's conceived. From the moment it's conceived, it's given that soul, that spirit. And there is nothing within Scripture that would suggest otherwise. When these children were struggling together, okay, again, this is Esau and Jacob, and part of the reason why Jacob was named Jacob, the usurper, is because he was holding on to the foot of Esau. Okay, fetuses or tumors can't struggle. They can't fight. They have no self-awareness. They have no ability to do that. They're not alive. And yet, according to God, they struggled within her. Already there was that, I don't want to say personality, but what would end up kind of defining Jacob and Esau's relationship in the flesh had already started inside the womb. Not even from the womb, but inside the womb. Thoughts or comments through Genesis 25? Doug.
John the Baptist had a reaction before Easter was born
Yep,
to the voice of the mother.
absolutely.
I mean, and I think it's a reference that he was filled with the Holy Spirit before he was born.
That's right.
How could
How can a tumor be filled with Holy Spirit?
one still belong?
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. Yeah, we'll talk about that here in just a minute. Yeah. Whether in the womb or in the crib, the child is dependent. And that's one of the arguments, well, as long as it's inside the mother, it's dependent on the mother. Is a baby any less dependent on a mother or on someone to care for it outside of the womb? No. Now, physiology, the biology of it, sure, but still, again, as of 20 weeks, there are babies who are perfectly viable even outside of the womb with no more biological dependence on the mother. If they can continue to be viable and continue to be alive, how can you say that if it's in the womb, whether it's in the womb or not, that it's not dependent on or depended on? Before delivery and after delivery, he is an innocent, dependent human being. The Bible does not distinguish between prenatal and postnatal life. God said to Jeremiah, and this is one that we're familiar with in chapter 1 and verse 5, "Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee. Before thou camest out of the womb, I sanctified thee. I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations." God had a plan for Jeremiah, but he specifically says, "Before I formed you in the belly, I knew you." Well, where does every soul that has ever lived, where does it come from? Huh? Well, yeah, every person comes from a belly, but where does every soul come from? God. God is the one who creates it. God is the one who places it as soon as that life is conceived. And when he tells Jeremiah, "Before I formed," notice he says, "I formed you." Before I formed you in the belly. Okay, notice he doesn't say, "Before I formed the tumor that became you when your mother gave birth to you." That's not the language God used. And he's not using accommodative speech. "Before I formed you in the belly, I knew you." The psalmist considered that the Lord watched over his development in his mother's womb, Psalm 139, 13 through 16, and that's an interesting passage as well. Already there was a plan for his life. In Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16. I want to actually look at that because he doesn't quote it, but I thought it was an interesting reference anyway. 139, starting in verse 13. He says, "For you formed my inward parts, you covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the lowest parts of the earth. Your eyes saw my substance, being yet unformed, and in your book they all were written, the days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them." I just think that's a really interesting passage describing that we're not talking about a baby that's been born. We're talking about a baby that is yet unborn, and I would argue even pre-viability. I mean, in those first, from conception through up to 19, 20 weeks, he's describing this form that he had. He may not have had the full growth as a human baby yet, and yet he was alive. God formed him. And certainly a part of this, part of the trouble or the issue in talking about abortion is that most people, they don't want to give God credit for what God's done. They don't want to think about God. They don't want to think about a judgment day. They don't want to think about the fact that they were given a soul or a spirit. They don't want to even consider that. And so a lot of these issues that society is dealing with, like the lack of empathy, the lack of care for human life, what makes us different? What sets us apart? Well, ultimately, what sets us apart and should inspire care and concern for other people's lives is the fact that we have a soul. We have a spirit. But people don't want to think about that. And so they teach children that we're nothing different than monkeys, and as a result, we're all the same. We all die. Well, then what does it matter? I mean, the same ultimate point, it kind of flows into the concept of morality. Why is it wrong to go to school and kill people who I feel have wronged me? Because man says so? That's kind of an arbitrary decision. So, who are you to tell me that murder is wrong? Ultimately, where does the concept of morality come from? Who ordained it? God did. Through the law he gave to Adam and Eve, through the old law, and certainly through the law of Christ. All right, anything through Psalm 139? All right, to Doug's point, unborn John the Baptist leaped in his mother's womb when the expecting mother of our Lord greeted Elizabeth. That's in Luke chapter 1. The term used to describe the baby in the womb, brephos, is used interchangeably for babes before and after birth. And again, that's one of those, and I've heard the argument made, well, yeah, they use brephos because they were too primitive to have a differentiation between an unborn baby and a born baby. But I promise you, if God wanted a distinction made, he would have made it. The word denotes an unborn child, a newborn child, or an infant that's even still older. Okay, brephos is used in all of those ways, meaning there is no distinction as far as God's concerned through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit between any of those states of being, whether you're an unborn child, a newborn child, or even a little bit like a toddler, you're still a brephos. Yes, sir?
Going back to the two primitive argument, I think about the ancient Egyptians and how a lot of modern medicine came from
Yeah,
them.
yeah. And in some ways, there are some parts of medical knowledge that they had that I think we still don't fully appreciate and understand. You know, there were some things that they had knowledge of that some of our science has no idea how they figured that out without having the tools and the resources that we have. And yet, they were able to figure it out. They were not stupid people. The only difference between us and them is technology. They weren't dumb. And I really do think it's and that's just a totally different conversation, but I think it's a serious short-sightedness on our part to dismiss so quickly and so easily the civilizations that have come before us. And part of the reason why, though, is the fact that did civilizations before us put great emphasis on religious life? Yes, they did. And our society is trying very hard to paint anyone who's religious, regardless of if it's false gods or Jehovah, to paint anybody who's religious or spiritual as primitive or uneducated. And so it's easy for them to paint all these past civilizations. All these past civilizations were religious. They all had gods that they worshiped, and anyone who still believes in a god, you're just as primitive and uneducated as they are. And that's not giving credit that is due to people who understood there was something more than us. Now, granted, they worshiped false gods, but they were absolutely convinced there has to be something more than this. There's something more that exists, and that was passed down from Adam and Eve, past Noah and his sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, through all of those cultures. The fact that it all originated with Jehovah. In fact, that's what Paul describes in Romans chapter 1. All right. God's word has always taught, thou shalt not kill. Literal translation is, thou shalt do no murder. Murder is the deliberate taking of innocent human life or human life without just cause. Abortion is the planned intentional killing of a human life. So far as I can determine, abortion is nothing more than licensed murder. Would you agree with that? Would you agree with that? Yeah. Based on God's word, I don't see any way around it. Now, we'll talk more about this in just a minute. So, since abortions are now available to all minor women without parental advice or consent, and again, this goes back a long ways, much of the fear of pregnancy that used to prevent a significant amount of teenage sexual immorality has been removed. The result has been an alarming increase in teenage pregnancies. Many areas are already experiencing more adoptions than live births. Abortions than live births. According to a recent report, 3 out of 10 babies born in the U.S. are illegitimate, and I'm sure that's changed quite a bit now. What can we do? The most constructive thing we can do is continue to instruct our young people in true moral values and Christian principles, including wholesome sex education. I think that's very important. For some reason, sexuality, especially among Christians, is... for some reason, we get very embarrassed about it. Even with our children, we tend to be very, we squirm, we get uncomfortable, and our children can pick up on that if we act that way. We need to make sure that our children can talk to us and ask us questions, and that we can respond from God's word. And I've said this before, but a lot of times sexuality is viewed by Christians as something that is evil and sinful that is made okay by getting married, as opposed to sexuality being a wholesome and holy thing that God intended for a marriage that is turned and made defiled and profaned by man. And really, in a lot of ways, God has designed the relationship between a husband and a wife for that purpose. And that we need to make sure our children understand that, because a lot of times our kids are not being educated. We're relying on the world to teach our kids about sex education. And as we're hearing in a lot of school districts, what all is being taught and not taught in sex education that could lead our children astray from what God's word has to say. Okay, we will pick up on what can we do. We'll talk a little bit more about some aspects, like some of these hypothetical situations which do happen. What about the life of the mother? If the life of the mother is in jeopardy, what do we do? And that sort of thing that have been brought up. We'll talk more about that as we go through the end of our lesson next week. Thank you, everybody.